Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome my two guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Good to see you, Arnie. It's
No
always
worries.
fine to be here.
Pleased to have you, Robert. And Wally Klinck. Welcome, Wally.
Well, nice to see you again, Arnie. Glad that you're entering your spring now, where we're just descending into our winter. It is just beginning to be fall now. So it's
I don't,
dismal and rainy and depressing right now. So
yeah, I
it's
don't
going to
envy you. I don't envy you, Wally. I think in ski season, if it's a calm day, I'd love to be there. But apart from that, I love the open blue skies that we have in Australia, and the
yeah,
fact that probably at least 300 days a year we've got a vivid blue sky, like the titles at the bottom of the screen. It's actually so blue, it's gorgeous. And the more north you go, the more vivid that blue is. It's an incredible phenomena.
that's
I just
amazing.
yeah, I just recently travelled across the west, and in the plane coming back, I noted the look of the ocean. The ocean in certain parts of the west is turquoise, and it's so vivid. It's vibrant. It's almost fluorescent.
Mm.
It's just such a lovely colour of the water, and beautiful part of Australia. I've been there a few times and toured the coast with my daughter, and I called her my mermaid because every time we every time we were driving, we jumped out for another swim in the ocean, and we just drove for days and swimming and driving, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. Lovely country. So yes, I don't envy you. I love where I live. Okay.
Well, we were raised in a city in Canada that has the most sunshine of any other, and they say it averages 325 days a year.
hmm
So it was pretty nice too. But
hmm
unfortunately, both of us moved away.
Mm.
We're
No
no
worries.
longer there.
No worries. Isn't it interesting? I guess it's probably what you used to too, because there'd be so much pleasure you could have from the winter, the time, if you acclimatise. So it's to me quite
Mhm.
important. Okay,
The
Yeah.
the wonderful earth.
it is, and so diverse, and it's fascinating that people can be so accommodating in their part of ship. So the title for today's discussion, The Pyramid of Power, I want to actually cut across to an article that was originally printed 1919 in the English Review, The Pyramid of Power by C.H. Douglas. This is actually in our library under Douglas. You'll see it there, The Pyramid of Power down the bottom. And it's to do with, I guess I did another search, and it was in regard to history. Is it episodic or is there design? And this was actually a consequence of consideration of a recent video, which I'll provide the link in our for our audience. A recent video by Jordan Peterson discussing, and I think an area that an opportunity for further discussion is this pyramid of power and design or purpose in regard to history. Wally Klinck.
Well, yes, that's right. Jordan did a very interesting interview, and he definitely brought up and emphasized the pyramid of power at one interval. Uh, he discussed it in terms of different multiplicities of pyramids of power within society. Um, we have we have a particular emphasis, and that is on the financial system as being an instrument of policy which is continuous rather than episodic. It is a policy that is carried by the financial system, the way it's constructed, the way it's conducted. And so I thought that this was a very interesting presentation by Peterson, and it needs some elaboration, however, because he does not seem to, on the surface at least, he does not seem to be aware of the overriding role of finance as an abstract representation of our activities in life. He doesn't approach it from that standpoint. He doesn't seem to mention or to see the key role, money as being the key. And by money, I mean credit. I mean banking.
hmm
I mean that those institutions which release credit, which make possible the release of human initiative and creativity.
That's a very interesting opening salvo, Wallace, and especially in regard to the, if you like, the universities, the seminaries, that the bequeathment of funds in order to develop certain lines of thinking, and of course, if that is outworked through the development of our educated young, then of course they can be either educated or indoctrinated. And so it's a huge power that goes through our teaching institutions. Robert.
Yes, well, Benjamin Disraeli, writing novels in the 19th century, pointed out that in the revolutions that swept through Europe in 1948, people regarded them as independent of each other, but he said behind them there was a coordinated effort, and that an identifiable group was operating the revolutionary activities. So even this indicates that there is an overarching a revolutionary activity behind all these changes that we have been seeing in society, and they are accelerating in recent times. But Jordan Peterson doesn't indicate the sort of antiquity of these things, how long they've been going on. I remember as a student in the 1960s, I was studying history at the University of Alberta, and I went to see some professors with what I regarded as a sort of controversial book that shed a different perspective on history. They were very unfriendly toward me, and I realized at that time that they had an agenda. And in fact, I think they were almost to a man promoting Marxism. So there's nothing new about this phenomenon. And Jordan Peterson doesn't set it, I don't think, in an adequate historical context. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, no, that's again another very valid comment about our educated systems. I note too that in the West there is a significant push at the moment to have full-term abortions, and also to promoting euthanasia. So in other words, the government, if you like, are acting spontaneously, not of their own volition. Actually, spontaneous is probably the wrong descriptor. They're acting in unison to bring about a change in our relationship to the value and sanctity of human life. And that is that under an agreed criteria, human life can be terminated. And this is most unfortunate that it's going right through the West, full-term abortions and euthanasia. And just as a matter of in discussion, this is politicians are almost to a man in agreement with it, and that's absolutely incredible that we should place such low value on human life. Wally.
Well, that's right. And these things all, when you when you analyze them down to base, are expressions of the will to power. That's what it amounts to. And that means the will to power of some exercising power over others. An elite, if you want. When you were talking about Benjamin Disraeli, Bob, you were referring to a one-time Prime Minister of Great Britain, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So he was speaking, and he said that governments do not govern. It is, as you said, a group of people unseen behind the curtains that actually control events. And that may sound a bit melodramatic, but when you look at politics and you realize how politicians are extremely averse to dealing with anything that could be controversial in the way of values, policies. They don't want controversy because it interferes with their program of centralizing and holding power. And they want to avoid those things. But basically, I think that they soon learn when they get into office that there are certain things that they had best not touch. Because if they want to remain in office and continue to have the power to govern, they think, or they would profess, or to be in the position of having the perks that go with government, being in government, they're going to have to behave themselves and behave themselves very carefully. So I think that you find that I think Bob, you were saying that someone had made a comment within the media that they were afraid. You were referring to something, I believe, when we were discussing.
Well, I was referring to Jordan Peterson's recent talk in which he said that in the last week or 2 weeks or whatever, he had been speaking to 10 of possibly the 20 most recognized and influential media people in Canada, and he said they're all afraid. Didn't say what they were afraid of, but he said they're afraid. They are not necessarily happy with the direction events are taking, but they will not speak out because their futures and jobs would be jeopardized. That's the problem. So it's this full employment system. We're all enslaved to this necessity to earn our incomes through employment. And if the threat of withdrawal of the employment is very intimidating. And Jordan Peterson was recognizing that it applies to the people in media. Wasn't saying it applied to everybody in society, but it's not hard to see that it does.
That's a very important comment between the two of you in regard to even within media, because my thoughts were the inordinate power of media over politicians, that politicians won't step outside the box, they won't say anything controversial. Now, to me, terminating life is enormously controversial, but the fact is that media is complicit in this policy. In full-term abortions and euthanasia, they are complicit. They are presenting a case that says that, oh no, this is the right of everyone to do this. And the fact is that our culture says no, not even the right to kill yourself. You don't have that right. Life is so sacred, it's a gift. And for us to actually discuss something, in my view, so controversial, and yet the media insists that it's not controversial at all. This is just a right. So of course the if you like, the education indoctrination of people isn't just schools, universities, the seminary, the pulpit. It's also the media itself. We are actually constantly being educated and re-educated. It's almost like an open air prisoner of war re-education camp. Wally.
Yes, it certainly is. And see, as Douglas said, in fact, it was said before Douglas that the media is concentric with and subservient to finance. And what we're saying here, I mean, if the media is afraid, we have to ask, no, why are they afraid? What is it they're afraid of? How far can we trace that back to cause and effect? Going back to original cause. And is it just due to some difficult bosses, or is it due to some kind of a continuous policy, with a philosophical basis that could go back over centuries, perhaps even millennia? The will to power. Is the will to power something that's just episodic, or is it scattered here and there, or is it something that is a continuing policy? And does it have any kind of a continuous structure or carrying force, conscious force? And I think we have to, we have to look at things like that, because it's absolutely critical to our lives as human beings. Are we to be free human beings, or are we to be victims of some kind of an external policy that we don't understand, but which controls every aspect of our lives?
Yeah, no, beautifully put, Wally. That's exactly right. And to me, it comes back to, if you like, how do we unlock the keys to freedom in this situation? when we've got the clamp, the shackles of totalitarianism coming at us so um, dramatically, like a steam train. How do we unlock it? In my view, it comes back to the individual. It comes back to actually stopping the indoctrination where it starts and taking into account, if you like, the lessons of history and trying to take those lessons forward to actually bring a new narrative to the civilization, a new narrative that actually removes power from the will to power. It removes that power. And that, to me, is where the Douglas social credit proposals hold their ground. They actually take civilization forward by placing a small package of power into the hands or placed at the feet of every single individual. That's what it's about. It's about returning power. As King John had power wrestled from him by the barons at Magna Carta, the Henry VIII pulled that power back when he argued and said that the church is subject to the king. So this argument of power has gone on for millennia, and it is today, this question of power. Should a small elite, the pyramid of power, control every facet of everyone's life on the world? Should they have that power? Or should the power be placed at the feet of the individual so that he can exercise his own right and, if you like, live out his own utopia in his part of ship? Robert.
Well, the challenge is to find a way to get that power to the individual. Mm-hmm. And in conventional discourse, no effective proposals to that effect are ever raised. This is what makes Douglas social credit unique, because he did have specific proposals for transferring the power inherent in the financial system from the monstrous monopoly it is today into the hands of all, well, members of society, citizens, and this would be a total transformation of society, because it would free people from this fear of losing the basis of their financial security, which they derive currently through a form of compulsion, intimidation, coercion in the employment system. People have to, if we are ever going to change the situation in the world, people have to get beyond that idea that governments exist to create work for people. Because governments existing to create work for people just means that governments exist to enslave them.
That's right.
And we're in such a amazing period of productivity and technology. Surely that society should be changing its financial arrangements to accommodate these modern conditions. But there are no proposals to that effect. So we have to get some original thinking in there. And the one who developed the original thinking that seems to be most promising for promoting personal freedom and security was Major C.H. Douglas.
Thank you for that, Robert. That was very well put. Exactly how I was thinking it. Wally Klinck.
Well, yes, and the thing of it is, the unfortunate thing of it is, and the tragic thing is, that Douglas has been deliberately excluded from the public discussion by the power of finance, which has devoted considerable amount of effort and money to discrediting the idea, and especially to just suppressing the idea. It's not known. Very few people know that Douglas was a prominent engineer, that he was also very informed with regard to accountancy and that sort of thing, that he actually appeared before national inquiries into the nature of the financial system. How many people know that? They will know. They probably may have heard of Keynes, and Keynes is taught, of course, but Douglas is never mentioned. But Keynes and Douglas actually appeared together on the same stage on different occasions. There is even a story, which I can't substantiate, but that apparently at an engineering conference, Douglas and Keynes were slated to speak, and the moderator introduced Keynes as the world's greatest economist. And I think Keynes is supposed to have demurred by saying no, but he's sitting beside me and looking at Douglas.
Hmm.
Now that is a story, a sort of a folklore story that is within the social credit movement. I have no reason to think it's not true, but I can't prove it is. But in any case, he was very prominent in a lot of activities which are simply erased from history.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Douglas said that at the turn of the into the 20th century, we were on the crest, we were on the horizon of a magnificent new civilization. But that unfortunately, that civilization was aborted by the malevolent forces of international finance,
Mm-hmm.
of the money system, which perverted, distorted, and misdirected the whole thing, and turned it instead into a century of wars and destruction.
Mm.
And with the technology we have, even with all of these negative events, there is no doubt about it that we could have an absolutely fantastic civilization if we hadn't devoted so much of our energies to destruction.
Mm.
So it's an amazing thing. It's a very encouraging thing when you realize the potentialities, and it's a very depressing thing when you think of the way we've managed to sabotage it.
Yeah, no, that's beautifully put, Wally. I remember reading recently in regard to the, if you like, the expression of the war effort in Australia. If that same expression had been directed towards community, the individuals in community, every family would have had a house, freehold. Every family would have had a car. They would have furnished that house, and they would have had something like, it was either 20 or 40,000, I think, pounds at that time, in their bank account. That
Mm-hmm.
was the expenditure of the war. In other words, the material well-being of the individuals in community would have been catapulted forward with the technology, and it was deliberately sabotaged and instead directed towards bombs and armaments and military equipment. And it's just so frustrating because you look at the productive capacity that America has demonstrated, the greatest productive nation in the history of the world, and yet their impoverishment through the financial system. People defecating in the streets because there are no toilets, sleeping in the streets in the middle of winter, and half starved on green stamps and things like that. And yet there is the greatest productive nation in the history of mankind, and they're directing 50% of all their efforts into bombing other nations instead of feeding their own, instead of housing their own, instead of providing sanitation. It really is a deliberate sabotage of the economic system. It is very, to me, very, very vivid that we could do so good. We could do so good if we redirected. And that's why, in my view, the Douglas social credit proposal, while it's financial, isn't limited to finance, although it does identify finance as the strategic weapon. It also directs the, if you like, the responsible vote to the individual, and that is in the form of a citizens' initiative referenda recall proposal. And that is that if the bureaucrats, the governments, the public servants of the day, if they're out of line, in this case, on the public payroll, if they're part of the, if you like, the instruction, the education apparatus, and they have an ideology that is foreign to the nation, that they can be called to order. They can actually be sacked from their public job, and I think that that's really, really important. It's another, if you like, mechanism of placing power back at the feet of the individual. Robert.
Well, we certainly need to do some thinking about institutions, arrangements of that nature, because the pressure on politicians today is all from the top, and they are bending to it. And that's why we're getting such unsatisfactory results as far as the general population is concerned, because the general population has no mechanism whereby to exert continuous pressure on politics and to have a sort of threat over the head of politicians if they're not delivering the results the population wants. And what you just described would be a very good mechanism in that regard. The oligarchs are riding high today, and the population is becoming increasingly frustrated because there's no way to bring their policies under control and to reverse them. And it's something that's going to have to be addressed.
But thank you for that, Robert. I will put a rejoinder on that comment about citizens' initiative, referenda, and recall, and that is that at times the majority is wrong. At times the majority is wrong, and an interesting example is perhaps this case of Brexit, where we're looking at the British people doing their darndest to get out of the EU, and the politicians and the public servants doing their darndest to frustrate that policy. Is the majority right or wrong? It doesn't really matter, because if they get out of the EU, it's not the end of the world. It's just an outcome, and they can reorientate and sort it out later. But the fact is that at this moment, this is what the majority wants, and they have no form of expression except for the referenda that they held. Wally.
Well, this is a problem. We're caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, between a rock and a hard place. If we have independence as a nation, we are driven inexorably to try and to become involved and extricate and not extricated, but implicated in or drawn into external relationships, which of course reduce our sovereignty, because you have to give up a certain amount of your freedom and independence when you're trying to accommodate yourself to someone else. And this is largely pushed by the need for external trade, which we desperately use as an attempt to try and overcome the deficiency of purchasing power which every nation has at home. But the trouble is, when you get involved in these organizations like the League of Nations, the United Nations Organization, and the European Union, you then find that you become no longer master of your own affairs, but you become dominated by the power seekers within that organization. So that doesn't work. And you can see that the European Union is now subject to a lot of stress and strain. It is tending to implode or explode, whatever you want to put it. And it's because of the, you see, social credit is concerned with the principles of association. What is it about association in terms of form that makes it possible to be successful rather than unsuccessful? If you go by the wrong principles, you're going to cause stresses and strains and so on, which will literally sabotage the effectiveness of your association. But if you associate on the right basis, then you're likely to have harmony and constructive association and cooperation. And it is only on the basis of free action that you're going to get proper association, because compelled association is always resented. It is always unsatisfactory. Nobody wants really to be a slave. But under the present financial system, we are forced to be slaves. We have no alternative, or at least we feel we don't see an alternative, because the alternative is kept from us. So the diligent efforts that have been made to ensure that we do not understand what's causing a problem, a basic cause of a problem. So it's very important that we get a situation where the the increment of association, which builds up into the cultural heritage, is actually made effective by being distributed to the individuals in society to whom it actually belongs. But today is claimed by the banking system, which puts a mortgage or a debt claim on everything that is produced.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a claim that doesn't belong with the banking system. It belongs with the individual citizen as an inheritance. And Douglas said that as far as he could see, there was an enormous effort being made to discredit the whole idea of inheritance because of the freedom that it obviously gives to the individual.
Beautifully put, Wally. We're past the 30-minute mark. I'm going to call for closing comments, but this is a really good discussion. Robert Klinck.
The purpose of the financial system is to emasculate or paralyze the individual, and they have done this by means of alienating it from alienating the individual from his inheritance. And in all respects, in political development now, there is a stress on centralization of power, and this Brexit situation is exactly it. The council in Europe is not elected. It's completely detached from the populations who are involved in those countries. They do have members who are elected, but these members have no power to propose legislation. All they can do is approve or not proposals for legislation that come to them from this council, which consists, I think, of 28 individuals. So all the initiative is coming from the top down, and there's no means by which the individual can exert his initiative in a way that will affect policy. So this has been going on for a very long time. There's been a lot of hypocrisy among politicians in dealing with the situation. There were, for example, during the Depression, both William Lyon Mackenzie King, the Prime Minister of Canada, and the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, made very aggressive attacks in speeches on the financial system. But both of those people came from the financial system. Mackenzie King was an employee of the Rockefellers, and Roosevelt came from Wall Street on both sides of his family. So it's they speak out of both sides of their mouths with total alacrity, and you can't believe what they're telling you. So unless people can get into a position where they can exert their will on the political structure, we have a very dismal future ahead, because these people will continue to run the show.
That's a very valid comment, Robert, and especially in regard to organised dissent. And that is, I think, a lot of the critique, if you like, by those President and Prime Minister was for public consumption, but the actual outworking was non-existent. There was nothing that came of it. So, okay, we'll slam them. We just recently in Australia had a Royal Commission. Couple of blood noses for some bottom end players, but nothing changed. The structure, the policy, nothing changed. Closing comments, please, Wallace Klinck.
No, we have to develop a financial policy whereby the individual has free access to the proportion of wealth that is produced by non-human factors, which is technology today. And so that everyone has, a desire to survive. And we have to give first priority to that if we're going to even exist. But we shouldn't have to give obedience to some external power before we make decisions or give approval to things or to take actions on our own. We have to be free agents. We have to be able to say, no, I don't agree with you, and I'm not having to do with your policy. I am going over here instead.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, without fear of starving or being without a roof over your head.
Mm-hmm.
We have to, because that's the way it's meant to be in the real world. We live in a financial dispensation which makes everyone dependent upon authority exercised upon them from a superior level. And this is literally a system of tyranny. And we're talking here about the pyramid of power.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to do something to bring an awareness to the public as to what is happening, the nature of this pyramid of power, and how, by appropriate financial means, it can be broken down and dispersed to all people.
Beautifully put, Wally. That's an excellent summary. I'm not going to build on that because I think the thoughts are quite clear. Thank you so much for this morning, gentlemen. I really appreciate your input and this opportunity to discuss the pyramid of power on the Freedom Forum.
Nice to be with you, Arnie. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, Arnie.
Okay, cheers.